Hello, a wee video for anybody out there who works with young people or or in the frontline community in any sort of capacity, whether you're working with young people or not, particularly deprived communities. Notice the inverted commas there. Here are just 5 things that I've learned over the years in terms of successfully engaging with and holding the attention of and developing a proper authentic rapport with some of the young people that you might come across in your travels. Okay, first one, have a plan. That seems pretty self-explanatory. Sometimes it depends on your familiarity with the group that you're working with, but ideally you should have fleshed out bullet points, even if it's just in your head, of the order that you're going to go through with things, the introduction, what do you mean to cover, any tasks that you're going to set. Are you going to set time aside for people to feedback? Is there going to be time allotted for people to perform something that they've been working on? And always throughout the session, be checking in with everybody. Feel free to stop the session, ask people for feedback as you go, but always have a plan, because if you don't have a plan and you go in and it feels awkward or it's not connecting for some reason, without a plan and without a lot of experience, you're going to find yourself just dying in front of the group and losing the rapport and losing the room, and it being very evident to everyone that you've lost it. So unless you get hundreds of experience and you know your group really well, then just go in with a plan in mind straight away. This will help you feel more confident about what you're doing, and it'll help the participants to feel like they know what's going on. For so many groups that you work with in society, a lack of consistency is a theme in people's lives. So when things start to fall apart, everybody just goes back to their default position, which is apathy, bordering on challenging behaviour. So plan, very important. Second thing, right, the first few minutes of your workshop or your session are the most important. That's why a plan is important, but also really what's happening in those first few minutes is your participants are sussing you out. If you're working in a deprived community or you're working in a mainstream school, say in a deprived community, then you're under surveillance the minute that you come into contact with the young people, and those first instances in which you interact with them are key to establishing a rapport. So if it's appropriate, shake people's hands, get up when they walk into the room, direct eye contact, basically just good manners, right? Good manners, treat them as equals. Don't stand around like you're a teacher as people filter into the room. Don't buy into that idea of yourself as an authority figure. These ideas are very seductive because we spend so much time subjected to someone else's authority, rebelling against it, expressing our frustration at a lack of understanding from the authority figure. But the first time we find ourselves at the top of a classroom where the teacher stands, we're all suddenly like, oh, aye, I could buy into this idea of me as a teacher or me as a something, and you buy into that idea. So just always be mindful of that, always be aware of that. When people are coming into the room, be among them. Be among them, don't be above them, don't be below them. Those first few moments are key. You could go through it in your head before you go in. You could even have some bullet points written down. The key is, if you're in this line of work and your heart's in it and you understand your subject and the material well, then your passion for the subject should come through naturally. So the point is to try and feel comfortable, to be yourself, because if you reveal something of yourself, it's natural that the participants that you're working with are going to see themselves reflected back in that. If you feel nervous, acknowledge that you feel nervous. Say, I'm quite nervous about coming in here today for such and such a reason, or maybe a wee anecdote from earlier on in your day, something that makes you relatable, something that brings focus to the room, and something that shows that you are a relatable person, that you're a friendly person, that you're an approachable person, and that you are very present in the room with them at that moment. Okay, next. This is so important, and it kind of relates back to what I was saying a minute ago. Your job to go into a community is not to go in and instill people in that community with your values. All right? You might get told that that's what your job is, or you might have been led to believe that that's what your job is, but actually, your job is to go in there and broaden your knowledge of the community's values and customs. So when you go into a community, say you go into a deprived community, and a bunch of young boys are talking about the merits of grassing and don't grass, right? If you're in a deprived community, most people don't deal with the police, right? They don't deal with the police, any mention of the police. They're just like, what screws, what, the police represent the ultimate authority, and everybody's very skeptical, and it's extremely taboo to communicate with police or to even acknowledge any positive aspects of law enforcement generally. So if you were in a school and people were talking about don't grass, and there was a don't grass, or somebody was getting called a grass in the school, then unless there's any issues around personal safety or any aggression happening, you should feel free just to let that discussion play out and get to understand the intricacies of the moral logic in which these young people are rooted. So as much as you personally might not see the merits in having a very anti-police perspective on life, or you might not ethically agree with the fact that people might know some crime that was committed and someone came to harm, but have decided the moral thing to do is not speak to the police. You might disagree with that. The point is, you're just there to learn where they're at. You're trying to learn and understand their culture and the sophistication and richness of it, which is often not assumed. So you're trying to broaden your own knowledge so that you can go into another community armed with the knowledge that you've learned then, and maybe not be as put off or perturbed by what you hear. So your job is not to go in and instill people with your values. Your job is to go in and learn about the values of the group that you're working with. Okay, right. This when you work with young people, there's always this idea in your head that you have something to give them, and once they acquire that, they will become valid in some sort of way, or they will have gained a new skill, or they will they will leave a better person having come into contact with you. That might be true, but it's a dual exchange that's happening, and if you're not open to that, then you're going to be a stagnant, apathetic person operating in the community, and people who are intuitive in these communities and already skeptical will suss you out very, very quickly. So the first thing that you want to do when you go in is, and this helps with rapport, is acknowledge something about a participant or a group that they already do really well. Obviously, you're going to be passing on skills or insights, or there's going to be practical tasks where they're going to be challenged in different ways. So one way to sort of create rapport, show them that you're observing them, that you're aware of them, is to pick up on something they already do really well, something that they already have, something they don't have to acquire. So it could be as simple as someone's handwriting. It doesn't even need to be the most beautiful handwriting ever, but see if you can read it, or you can see the person's making a massive effort, even just writing stuff down on a piece of paper, as it often is the case in a lot of these deprived communities, then feel free just to acknowledge that. It's really simple. It doesn't require a massive amount of effort. It's really just about being present. It's really just about emotional literacy. It's about understanding. It takes a tremendous amount of effort and courage for young people to come into an educational environment, to meet someone new. Often they'll be in a group with other young people that they might not even be familiar with. So for them to take part in the activity and write some stuff down, that's a way for you to acknowledge that as you go, and watch every single time. Whatever it is you compliment, and it could be something like handwriting, like I say. It could be that you're aware someone's a good listener. Could be colour coordination. Some people just dress really well. It's okay to acknowledge that with a young person and say, wow man, your outfit's really coordinated. compliment them. There's a skill to colour coordination just as there is to harmonising music. It's the same skill. So just you're looking for any opportunity you can to acknowledge something that they're already good at, something they're already successful at in their life. And by doing that, you endear yourself to them and their community because they get a sense that you really are paying attention to them. And for so many young people in these communities, that's the fundamental thing that's missing. That validation, that feeling of safety and security, that someone is supporting them, that someone is willing them on, that someone is encouraging them to transcend the difficulties that they're facing. And for some young people, it's as difficult as I can't read and I can't write. Okay, and finally, number 5, hang in there. If it's not working, don't be afraid to change it, and don't be afraid to if you're in a situation where it's not working. The ways that you'll know it's not working, it's instinctive, right? You can feel the atmosphere in the room has changed, or perhaps you can tell that people are becoming disengaged. Maybe people are throwing pens down on the table. Maybe they're talking to each other. Maybe things are getting rowdy. There are things that you would just instinctively run through depending on what your experience is. So make sure the young people are getting necessary comfort breaks. Make sure that the material that you're using to try and the workshop's based around actually applies to the young people and they relate to it in some way. So don't be bringing in T.S. Eliot into Easterhouse unless you already understand that the people that you're working with have an interest in T.S. Eliot, because the sort of things that we would consider to be meaningful or the sort of things that we would consider to be exciting might not apply to the group that we're working with. And so if they're disconnecting from the material, this will sow the seeds of apathy, which will eventually lead to resistance and challenging behaviour that you have to mop up in some way. So don't be afraid to just say, is this activity no good for you? Let's sit down and talk. Quick feedback. How's everybody feeling? Oh, well, I don't really know what I'm doing. I'm not into this. I'm bored. Such and such. Just open it up. Let that become part of the query. Let that become part of the work, part of the investigation. And always make sure as well that your location where you're holding the workshop is suitable for the sort of thing that you're doing. So if there's a physical component to what you're doing, make sure it's not a tiny room. If you're dealing with paper and pens, make sure you're not sitting outside when it's blowing a gale. These all seem dead simple, but sometimes it can be a case of just the location. For example, if I have a workshop sometimes in the Gorbals and it's in a big church which has been converted into a church hall, which seems like an ideal space. But the problem is when you actually get the young people into the designated community space, it's not cordoned off for the rest of the church. So the young people just have a sense that they can just go out and wander anywhere they want. But it's a massive space, and sometimes it might only be you and another worker. And so as much as this space looks perfect, and it's really good to look at, and it's really amazing to be inside the big church, it's actually really impractical. You lose all the energy, you lose all of the momentum, because you're constantly having to ask young people to come back into the room. They're getting a feeling that they're always just getting moaned at. You're getting frustrated with them. It's not ideal. So the location, the material, and also a wee thing to double check is, before you actually deal with the young people, you should be notified if anybody has any additional support needs that might require extra support. So sometimes you might have a young person who's not engaging, and then you might find out later when it's too late that it's because they have different styles of learning, and that aren't necessarily accounted for when you go in. So it's important to get that information prior, but also don't be just scared to ask young people if they need help. What do they need help with? If you're getting a sense that a young person that you're working with might have additional learning needs, then just find a compassionate and intuitive way to ask them that question. They're just people like you. They're dealing with the same anxieties that you're dealing with. So if you keep tuned into yourself and mindful of yourself, it shouldn't be too difficult for you to relate to young people and for them to relate to you. And I think this goes for any section of the community, regardless of age. So these are just 5 different tips for anybody out there who might be just getting started in community arts, who might be going into the third sector, who might be doing a bit of volunteering, whatever. These are things to think about, and the more that you work these things into your workshops, they just become instinctive, and you become really effective and really efficient. You'll have bad days, you'll have bad projects. Sometimes you won't get along with the people you work with, sometimes you'll make an arse of it. All of this, feed it back into the mill of your practice, always reflecting, never be afraid or ashamed to say I got it wrong and here is why, and never be ashamed or scared to change something that isn't working. Just leave your pride at the door, get in there, get in about it and enjoy it. Alright, take it easy.